I've been with SPOHP for 5 years now, since the end around September of 2015. So yeah, this would be my 5th year. I've been transcribing at this point for 5 years, along with audit editing for about 3, and then now final edit for about a year and a half. Hello, welcome to SPOHP, and my name is Sandra Romero, and I will be here today to show you the process of transcription. So let's get started. Most important, what is transcription? It's one of the most important parts of the oral history work that we do, because it helps make the interview accessible for people overall in an easier fashion that can be used for an enormous amount of different reasons. And here it shows the challenge of transcription is simply stated. It shows the different complex ways that people actually do talk. We do keep true to the colloquialisms and spellings that are in these oral histories. So the next coming slides will be the style guide that we adhere to for the transcription process. So at SPOHP, we do not edit any of the interviews, except in the rare specific cases, we would archive them. However, we do have different steps for the process. And so the step that you guys will be focusing on is stage 1, the most important one, draft transcripts. From then on, once you complete those drafts, it will go on to the stage 2, which is audit, edit, and abstracts. And I will be going over as well how to complete abstracts, because I was told that you guys will be learning how to do those. So I'll be helping you as well. And then finally, final edit and abstract review. So we'll be working on stage 1 primarily. So when beginning a transcript, after this point, you should know how to maneuver around the shared drive, I believe. So once you get to the project that you are assigned to, most likely MFP from what I'm hearing, we're going to start creating the header of your document. And so it should be on the, like how it shows over here, it's going to be on the top left-hand side of the first page. And it's going to have the project code. So in this case is NH for the project Nuestras Historias. But if you're part of anything else like African American History Project, AHP, that would be what you write here with the number. So this would be the general template of the number. The interviewee is what's on the file name. And then for the interviewer, you would listen to the audio, and more often than not, they would introduce themselves. And then you write the date of the interviewer. So this is how it looks here visually. And then what's most important is the formatting of this, because this header is going to be different from the sequential pages. So you want to click the first one that shows different first page and show different document text. So you would check mark those and make sure that this is for Arial and 12-point single space for this area. So this will be able to show the 2 different headers, which we're about to go into. And so the second header, once you get on page 2, after you are transcribing, you would do the title of the interview. It'll be separated by semicolons. The name, more often than not, is going to be it's the last name. So this person has 2 last names, and then another semicolon and page 2. And then from the setting that you put here is going to then be the same for page 3 and page 4. Now, once you are done with that, you want to set the correct settings for your whole transcription. You right-click on your mouse. It would show paragraph, and once you click on it, what you want is for it to be left and right onto 0 and hanging. Same thing here, 0 point and double. And it looks like this, and then you're going to click OK. And I can show you real quickly how a transcript looks with that right here. This is how the spacing is with those margins. So there's going to be a space between the dialogue and the actual people who are speaking. So sometimes you'll hear people in the background getting set up saying, "Are you good to go?" Blah, blah, blah. Usually we have a very formal, I would say, script-based introduction. This is X, Y. So in my case, it would be, this is Sandra Romero with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program on this date at this location, and I'm interviewing so-and-so. So that is the general cue for the transcriptionist and for anyone listening or reading, that that's the beginning of the transcript. So if there's anything beforehand, unless it's like really pertinent to understanding the rest, like it's setting up for an event and they're saying something that's going to prompt the narrator, I would say you can start the initial at the introduction part, or sometimes if it's a speech, you wait for the person, you type when they're starting to speak, but you don't have to start immediately start typing the prep work or the background. And same thing if you get like if there's someone gets interrupted in the middle of an interview and they're like doing quickly saying like how to, like they're setting their phones. That happens a lot in interviews where they have to fix something on their phones, or they're talking to someone about their, you know, their domestic life. You don't have to write that. We're talking about the narrative. So we're not writing a book. We're just writing the narrative of this oral history. From then on, you're going to be listening to the audio of an interviewer, and from here on out is just listening to it and documenting what you're hearing. So when you're first starting a transcript, you want to get the basic initials for the interviewee and interviewer to distinguish who is speaking. So in our style guide, we use the first letter of the speaker's last name, so you're able to know who is speaking. So then you will follow it with a colon right here, and click tab so that it will create this space, so that it'll be able to show the text. And so this is how it'll look with Sandra Romero and Paul Ortiz. O for Ortiz when he speaks, and so R for when I speak. Now there are different cases, however, where people have the same last name, or they have the same two letters, in which we would have different examples. So, and you never need to worry. You can always feel free to ask for help if you come across anything that you are confused. We're plenty of people here at staff, myself included, are here to help you. So please feel free to also ask. So for this example here, if both people's last names start with the same letter, use the first letter of the first name also. So Samuel Erickson and Felicia Evans, since they both start with Erickson and Evans E, then you put the first letter of the first name, S-E-F-E. That's how you distinguish. And if someone has a hyphenated last name, you use the first letter of the first word. For example, Jane Tomlinson Smith, it would be T, the first one. And if both individuals have the same initials, we've had those cases where the interviewees were related, or the interviewer as well was interviewing one of their family members. They have the same name. Then at that point, it's up to your discretion as to how to differentiate. And then from the point on, through the audit editing process and final editing process, it will be looked over. So you don't need to stress yourself out too much. So now when it comes to completing a transcript, this is towards the end, so you can reference this. You are going to mark this towards the end of the interview, and you will write in brackets "end of interview" as you sign the document. You don't need to worry about this part, but this is how it looks at the end. So you would write "end of interview" in bracket, and you yourself will write "transcribe by," tab, your name, and the date that you completed the transcript. From then on, once it goes through the other processes, they're going to add their names as well, and it's going to be completed like this on the UF archives. So that would be your part. So that's how it looks in an actual dialogue. So when it comes to this particular part now, when it's the bulk of transcription, formatting would be the most difficult. From here on out, it's listening to audio, documenting what you're hearing verbatim, and here's just the different conventions that have updated through the years that you might want to know. So we're going to go over specific moments where you're going to need different techniques. So one of the most frequent things that we have with these audios, sometimes there's inaudible moments. When speech on a recording is inaudible, try playing it first at higher volumes or slower times, because often than not, that does help a lot of people get a more accurate hearing. You also can try different headphones first. However, if that doesn't stop the quality, which often than not, some of these interviews can be older, or the circumstances just led to the technology being a little out of date, then at this point, we have different processes to go about that. I would definitely say maybe your first time, do it from scratch to actually understand the process. However, from then on, I believe in the phrase work smarter, not harder. So if there's a template like like I said, in a lot of these project folders that you will be learning how to navigate through or have already learned. In those, more often than not, in those files for abstracts, there's already a template. So what I recommend is to copy and paste that blank template and then fill it out with the new information of your current transcript that you're going for. So if it's all blank, where it's just you need to fill out the number, the name, and X, Y, and Z, then it's best to just do that and just make sure everything is accurate and consistent if you're going to use the templates. If not, then if you can't adhere to the consistency of it, then I would say try to make it from scratch every time.
The following is an interview with Sister St. Anthony of the Convent of the Sisters of St. Joseph in St. Augustine, Florida. It was conducted on August 28, 1976.
The Indians come up here every year, you know.
Oh, for the pageant here, do they? Yeah. Sister St. Anthony, when were you born?
Monday on September the 7th, 1891.
1891. Wow, that's a long time ago. And where? Were you born in Florida?
Oh, yes, Haines City.
And what was your name? What was your family name before you took your vows?
Oh, what that is, it's Mary Bannon.
Mary Bannon.
Yes. And Haines City, Polk County, Florida. That's where, that's the address.
Uh-huh.
So if you, when you're listening to the audio, can make some form of an educated guess. For example, the example I like to use is someone is saying vice versus something else. Someone I've heard in the audio before was talking about one of their vices. This translation to one of the things that they're guilty pleasures that they like to do. So however, if that with an audio that's distorted or at least hard to hear, you can make an educated guess based on hearing that. Someone would put lice or nice or something of that sort. If you can make an educated guess, we want you to write what you think you hear and then bold it. The audit editor who comes after you is going to pay attention every time you bold something so that they're going to be able to possibly fix it. So don't bold an entire sentence unless you're really able to make a long educated guess. However, that's more of an inaudible, which we're about to go towards. So in those cases, if you just listen to the audio multiple times and you cannot distinguish what they're saying, and that's perfectly okay, because like, again, not every audio is perfect, then what we want you to do is in open brackets, type in inaudible, and you are going to be typing in the timestamp. So in this case, at 33 minutes and 07 seconds, there was part of the sentence or phrase that was not able to be heard. So we take our cotton to Mr. Inaudible, Jin, and Cameron. That's how we would want you to write that. So once again, you would bold if you can make an educated guess, or you can somewhat sound it out. If not, put inaudible with the time. So for the brackets, they're kind of like directional or narrative such, like pausing in recordings. A lot of the times through these interviews, we have a lot of different instances that can cut, like phone ringings, someone walking in, someone's family member speaking to them.
Oh, my name is Tom King.
Tom King.
K-I-N-G, yes.
Anything can happen. So for those particular things, these are the little ones that we like to give. So if there's a pause in the recording, the official one we'd like is break in recording. The end of the interview, like we mentioned, would be in brackets like that. A lot of the times in these interviews, people recalling these memories can get quite emotional, whether it be happy or sad. So Try not to overuse them. More if it's a more poignant moment of laughter, you write laughter. Crying, sometimes in these moments they recall something, and in the nostalgia start crying, you would write that. Telephone ring as well. It's very self-explanatory. Claps, a lot of for claps, it's more of some of these audios are speeches of narrators and orators. So a lot of times there'll be a long line of a monologue, and then it would cut to claps. So you would write that in brackets, or applause. So that's basically how we write all the use of for bracket terms and basically the narrative words or terms. And these don't have to be used all the time, but it helps for the overall understanding of the narrative or the text. So here's example one, where it shows a particular sentence. That's what I was saying. I was no bigger than the dresser. Ooh, quit that, you're so bad. Now, when adding laughter into it, it creates a whole new feel and a whole new sentence. And it gives you a better feel of how the actual interview went. Sometimes things can be misconstrued through text. So sometimes adding these brackets with these words in there can really help give a more accurate feel of the interview that day and the feelings that the interviewee was going through. Now, from here on out, it's basically a lot of grammar and conventional syntax and all that jazz. I'm going to give just a basic couple, and attached with these videos are going to be the style guides for reference that have a list of many more of these examples of common mistakes. So the ones that we want, okay versus okay, just because sometimes we all make those mistakes, translation through texting to typing. So we try to just keep it as written out and professional as possible. So these are just some of the ones that we've seen over the years, basically so these are the common mistakes over here, and then these are how we would want them. And again, you would go to the style guide, which again will be sent to you, so you can go through the pages and see what else for reference if you ever have a question when you're typing it or if you're unsure. So when it comes to the narrative, we try to keep it as authentic as possible. We do not omit improper grammar. We make sure we keep that. We do not change it. It's our job to document this history and not to change it in any way. It applies to curse words, slurs, and also possibly any other derogatory remarks. These are older stories sometimes, and the past was not always kind. And so we try to be as authentic as possible by writing everything out as true and verbatim as possible. So it's okay to leave fault. So here's some examples, double negatives. There's a lot of people who that they speak, that's perfectly fine. So there's no need to change it. So here, I never been in that kind of situation before. You wouldn't change the double negative. However, do be careful of overusing these particular words like these, but that's more for the filler words that we're going to go into a little bit later. So another part when it comes to the grammar and syntax are dashes, known as the Mdash. It's not a hyphen nor an N-dash, it's the longer one. And the instances that you would use these, which are quite often in these dialogues, because they are between two people and conversation is fluid, so people start and stop at the same times. So it'd be used through an interruption by another speaker. So in this example, P is speaking, and then in the middle of it, the O is starting to speak, and then they answer. So I am from a small town near. You would put the Mdash as they're getting interrupted, write out what's the next sentence being that's doing the interrupting, and then write out what's continuing. Along with dialogues, the person themselves also can interrupt themselves. As we speak, we tend to have multiple thoughts at once and change what we want to say, how we say it. I've done it probably multiple times through this presentation. So in those cases, we would document that as well. And a lot of people are trying to remember some memory that they haven't gone back to in a while. So things change. So for that example, this person is saying that was back in July. They interrupt themselves. No, wait, it was August. Interrupt, and then back into the sentence of 1960. And another one, it was one of those, how would I put it? It was like an epiphany. And then the last time you would use an Mdash is when someone deliberately stopped speaking before finishing their sentence. In those situations, sometimes you just had to And usually they do a pantomime, which is not really something that's really easily transcribed. So then you would just continue the sentence. So that these are the instances, and these are different from ellipses, which we're gonna, I think, come up next. Yes, so we only use ellipses very sparingly. It happens quite a bit when the speaker trails off, resulting in a long pause. So you just add 3 periods separated by a space and separated from the word that follows. And more often than not, you're going to be using the Mdash rather than the ellipses because of the conversation and back and forth. But there are some times during the reminiscing that ellipses will be used. And this would be the example here of that was a long time ago, but they trail off into thought. And then the narrator, the interviewer is asking, what were you going to say? And then the person can't recall. So those will happen, and that's up to your discretion. More often than not is a long pause rather than an interruption followed by an immediate thought. Another thing that's very important are false starts, like I just had. We try not to include false starts or repeated phrases just because it kind of hinders the flow of the narrative. We're not changing anything of the narrative, we're just making it easier to read. So the only exception is if the false start enhances the statement, which happens once in a while. And once again, based on the examples we set and from your experiences later, it'll be up to your discretion how to judge that. But you can also always come to us and ask for a second opinion. So with repeated phrases, you use your judgment. If it's only redundant, it's better to omit repetition in these sentences. Again, it just hinders the reading unless it demonstrates a particular deliberate rhetorical use for emphasis. Otherwise, then it seems meaningful, then you can leave it in. So this is how it's written with the false start. This person started, we went, and then switched up. We were going south for the warmer climates. That we went was not necessary. It did not enhance or emphasize the sentence. So more often than not, you would cut that out and just say we were going south to the warmer climates. Those happen quite often. Again, we stutter, we stammer. So try to keep the false starts at a minimum if you can. Keep the ones that do enhance a little bit. Otherwise, just write out the full sentences. Along with that, there's a lot of feedback words from the interviewer. As an interviewer, if you've ever had experience or you might have experience in the future, we often try to show the interview we are listening, we are here, we are engaging as they're telling these long stories and memories. So that doesn't always necessarily need to be transcribed as well. It's just more of a thing that's in the present time. So too many of that, once again, also interrupts the flow of the transcript. So in this case, that was the craziest thing I ever heard. The person says, it's not really necessary in the final transcript, so it's basically can be omitted. So the correct way would be, that was the craziest thing I ever heard. Don't you think so? And then it would be, So if you would keep the feedback words, if there was a question ahead of time that prompts it. If it's just something that was there once again to show that's acknowledgement, then you don't need to keep it, you can just omit it. And for feedback words, there's a whole different ways everyone writes out uh-huhs, mm-hms, These are the 3 that we've agreed on after years of debating. So for the agreement terms of and these are how we would spell them. And is this one. So those would be the ones that you would use when you do decide or are able to include the feedback words. And filler words, which is something that can possibly happen if the speaker is constantly using filler words such as, like, you know what I'm saying, whatnot, that happens a lot. These can be omitted. However, it's preferable to leave a few, maybe 1 out of every 5, just to help preserve the character of their speech. You don't want to completely change the voice of the narrator as well. Again, authenticity is our goal. So the incorrect version of that was the repetition here of I've never thought about it that way, but I can see how, some people might do that. Now that would probably be how the speaker said it. However, it's keep omitting perhaps this one here and this one here, and keeping the one would still preserve the voice of the narrator and help keep the flow smooth of the reading. The correct version here, I never thought about it that way, but I can see how, and then so on and so forth. Another thing you can keep with the specifically is sometimes they'll have it at the end of a sentence as a question. If they do it as a question, then you're more than welcome to keep that on there as well, because they are engaging with the other person or the other individual. Dates. So we write the dates as follow in this format. Sometimes how the interviewer or the speaker, they talk, they can omit the century or say the decade. So if the speaker omits the century and just says the decade, you'd write out the full year with the omitted. So I was born in 67. You wouldn't put the comma numbers. You would put the bracket 19 and put the year afterwards. So here's some examples here. The bracket 19, the bracket 19 for the 50s. A lot of the times people reference a decade period, 50s, 60s, 70s. So you would write it this way as well, and no apostrophes before the S. It's not a possessive, it's just the plural decade. Always use numerals for the years, even in the beginning of sentences like this. And you can use the numerals for the days as well when they include the month and the year. So in this particular formatting. So spelling and diction. So you're gonna use you can use the spell check function that's in Microsoft Word. However, it doesn't always catch every error. So it's very important to proofread all of these transcripts. You don't have to focus too hard on trying to catch every single thing. Again, it will be auto-edit, but try to keep it as concise as you possibly can. It's understandable the first few times to get overwhelmed, but you can take your time. You're gonna have the time that you can to learn and acquaint yourself with how to transcribe. And then as the time goes on, you'll get more comfortable with it and you'll have your own groove to things. So you can also use the dictionary or Google Terms to verify particular spellings if you want. Make sure to use proper grammar, like these particular examples, use all right, not the combined version. You'll be perfectly fine. If you use the style guide, we have plenty of different examples for any situation you could possibly find yourself in at this point. To this day, I still use the style guide. So moving on, we do have abbreviations. These are just some different examples, like I said, as far as spelling conventionals that you'll find, because at this point, you're just transcribing what you hear. We try to avoid abbreviating. You write everything out, like the positions of people like governor. You wouldn't write GOV, you would write it out. Names of the countries, territories, provinces. So these are just the different examples here of the abbreviation that you might come across. So these are the abbreviations that we do often are fine with: the Mr., Mrs., Reverends, Doctor. There's some people who are juniors and seniors in their families, and that's perfectly fine to write them out after their name because it enhances. The directional signs, the north, east, southwest, all of those can be written out as well. AD, BC, the eras, these are basically all the proper abbreviations that you can put on here. The times for AM and PM, you would write that out, as well as agencies and organizations that have abbreviations in their names. For example, SPOHP, the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, NATO, the UN, AF, SEC, all the above, Texas A&M. All of these are perfectly acceptable to put on because that is their names and it's basically the organization, that's how they're referred to. Capitalization has changed over the years, so this is definitely something to pay note to. Obviously, you would keep capitalized of the names, persons, places, organizations, and such. Historical time periods such as civil rights movements is capitalized. Civil rights is not, but the movement itself is a particular time period or a historical event, and so in which it would be capitalized. To pay attention to would be the racial ethnic groups. We do now capitalize Black, White, Latina, Latinx, and etc., and all the different ethnic groups So that's something we do capitalize along with mother and father, only if they're used in a place of the person's name. Otherwise, they wouldn't be. So my mother would not be capitalized. However, if they're directly referring to them, that's when they would be. Just general writing. I'm pretty sure you've seen this in ENC 1101. Commas, the use of basic ones here. A lot of commas are easily heard through audio as natural pauses and or breaks in sentences, but use your discretion and your knowledge of the English language, as well as the style guide that we have here for the use of them. Try to avoid using too many commas just because we don't want too many run-on sentences in our transcripts. Hyphens we use as well to indicate division or separation. Usually in certain instances, we'll ask the interviewee to spell out their name. So in these cases, we would have a capital. That's how you would do it. You would hyphenate when appropriate as well with fraction expressed in words 1/5 to indicate nouns made up of 2 or more nouns, which imply the combination of linked things or characteristics like an astronaut, scientist, AFL-CIO, when 2 essential adjectives describe a noun. So he is a small business owner. They both describe the business. So just general English conventions are used as well in our transcripts because we want to be as professional as possible. These will be going in the UF archives here. So we wanted to look as professional as possible. And these are just some examples to not hyphenate. So her argument was well balanced. She was a good-natured. So do not hyphenate if the compound modifier follows the noun, such and so forth. Numbers, that's one thing that's changed. We do try to spell out whole numbers. So 99, 79, 69, 75th, 2200. However, this would be written out as 2367. When there's several numbers, I believe over 100, you start to write it out. So always spell out the number if it's the first word as well. So how old are you? 50. And the only time that you wouldn't write it out, like we've mentioned before, is if it's a date or if it's in the first word of the sentences. But more often than not, you will be writing out the numbers like this. Unless it goes above 100, then you start to write it out, put it in numerical terms. So for paragraphs, the Samuel Proctor oral history program, we don't break up the transcription into different paragraphs. Usually everything is going to be kept as one block of text. So if the person is talking for 10 minutes straight, you will see a long block of text for about 5 pages, and that's perfectly okay. The only time you'll ever really press enter or return is when you're introducing a new person speaking. So for quotation marks, we do use them when there's direct expression, news, or dialogue. So for example, this person says, when I was little, my mom used to say, and then the quote, if you study hard in school, I will take you to ice cream. Or he said, you're fired, and I said, we'll just see about that. This is quite often because a lot of times when people reminisce, they like to reminisce through conversations that they've had. And that's just the easiest way for people to communicate their experiences. So you'll be using quotation marks for those type of things. Also use quotation marks for names of articles, essays, programs, book chapter titles, and etc. So for example, you'll have seen the article Sharks in National Geographic. And you'll find more examples like these in the style guide again. Compound word formed with prepositions are pluralized by forming the plurals in the first noun. So fathers-in-law, multiples, you would put the plural. Capital letters of the alphabet are pluralized by adding S or apostrophe S. In this case, Z's, you'll put just plain S, no apostrophe. Use the apostrophe only where the confusion is possible. A's, not A's. Lower. So these are the examples in which of using the apostrophes if it's really hard to distinguish, and that's perfectly okay. P's and Q's, perfectly acceptable. abbreviation, you'll add S. So the JREs, we love those tests, don't we? And then when periods are used as well, add an apostrophe, and proper nouns, add S as well. So add S to the singular if the addition does not make an extra syllable, 6 King George's, because George and George's needs the extra syllable, which makes it plural, which is what they're talking about. But as far as basic grammar and conventions, we ask you to proofread. Sometimes in the heat of typing, you think you type everything right, and maybe you type out and type 2 words backwards. It's happened is just try to go back and look for those little underlined red lines on your Word document that you can try to fix or proofread. It just helps the process go smooth. I would highly recommend fix as you see them and go along, just because as you transcribe longer, by the time you're done with the transcript, mentally you're done with the transcript as well. You're ready to move on to the next one and move forward. And sometimes these transcripts can go over 40 pages because it's over hours long worth of interviews. So then it can be quite a daunting task after having finished transcribing these to go back and then find the issues that you left and that you wanted to consult. So whenever you come across something that you feel might need to be addressed in the style guide, it'll be easier for yourself, because then that might appear 5 more times after. And if you had just searched up the one thing in the style guide, then you would just be able to write it consistently. So for an expedited, more accurate, I would definitely say to do it as you go along. After you finish a transcript, we mentioned before that you're going to be also learning how to create these abstracts, because it'll be fresh in your mind after you've learned the stories and narratives of these people. So once you know how to navigate the share drive as well, you'll be able to find the particular folders where these abstracts are held for the prospective projects that you're going to be working on. In this case, this is MFP. For those of you who might be working on MFP in the future, this is the general, there's going to be a file name that says template for the abstracts. You would automatically open that, or you would make a copy of that file, paste it, and then write down the file name. So in this case, this is how you've seen the names before, the number and the interviewer's name and the date. So it's just written out in formal terms. So what you would do is when you come in making the abstract, you would write out the acronym of the project, in this case, MFP. So if it's interview 00, it was interview 112, you would write 112. And then you would write the interviewee's name. So John Smith, interviewed by, and then you would get the interviewer's name, which you would have already written down on the days so you that they did the interview, so by month, day, and year. And at this point, you would be able to know the time, the minutes, because you've been listening to the audio. You would write the amount of how long it was and the amount of pages that it took for you to do the transcript. At this point, abstracts are just a summary of an article or a particular piece of literature that you're reading. So having the interview or the story fresh in your mind, you would be the best candidate to be able to write these. So when you're writing an abstract, give a very brief overview. You don't have to go too into detail, especially for the ones that can run a little longer. Just give brief overview of it. What I like to recommend is follow the interviewer every single page, because they're directing where the story is going. So that's basically how you would get the summary. And then for keywords, we usually try to do this for later to make it accessible to teachers to use, as well as scholars for their dissertations and thesis papers. So for keywords, you would write what's applicable to the stories. So in this case, if someone's talking about segregation or integration, civil rights movement, those would be key terms that you would write. And other examples are cities, key events, businesses that are directly referenced, military. We have a lot of veterans with the Veterans History Project. Along with throughout all projects, we have stories of veterans that come into all these little niche categories, as well as occupations and etc. And those would be up to your discretion, because those will also be later audit edited and changed to add the Florida standards after you. But you're important because you're going to be adding the whole paragraph and the summary of the whole story itself, because you yourself would know the story best. So at this time, that would be the end of this presentation. So I thank you. And again, you're more than welcome to contact me, which I'm sure my contact information will be given. And I thank you. If you're doing transcribing from home and you have something small like I do with the MacBook Air, you might want to try to invest maybe like a nice cheap wireless bigger keyboard and a mouse, because the arthritis feels almost real. Like it's coming in, because it's a very tiny, on the keyboards it's meant for like light things and stuff, especially the MacBook Air, so it's really small and you're like constantly typing. And if you're, once you continue typing for a long amount of time, you learn a lot of your fingers muscle memory have maneuvers going across keys, and it's really hard with a laptop. I have the trackpad, and that's not helping me when I'm trying to do like double click and shift and delete and all these tricks. Yeah, it definitely has. I mean, transcribing it was a very unexpected, multifaceted skill set. For one, it increased my typing speed, and on the physical aspect, it increased my typing speed, which is actually a very good thing, a good quality to put on your resume from what I found out. But also it just kind of it gets you better in English as amongst history as well, because you're just taking this in, because you're typing as well, but you're also taking in information with audio, so it helps with your multitasking. So there's a lot of brain function going on, so I like the stimulation in my head as far as having to be able to type, because that shows future employers that you are able to multitask and be able to take in different forms of media and stimuli at once and be able to produce something out of it. So definitely that aspect has been one of the great things about learning to transcribe. And then you also just know a format to be able to create something tangible for people to look back at years later that could have gotten lost just the day of it was spoken had it not been recorded. But even been recorded, that can get lost anywhere. So having something documented and transcribed is very important and essential nowadays. So I definitely think those aspects are what have made transcribing a really valuable thing. So I think for me personally, the guiding thought that I would have is authenticity and objectivity. We're here to be observers and documenters, because without people documenting history, there would be no history. We do live in a world now where history can be manipulated and moved and rewritten and changed very much and erased very easily. So to me personally, the guiding thought I have is to make what is said by this person who's trusted us with their life story, to make it as authentic as possible to anyone else reading it, whether it be from adding an extra laughter, because I feel like me not writing it enough is making them sound too serious. However, this person is like the sweetest person, or adding more, or like including the shorter phrases and lack of it to show that this person is quite cold and distant through the hardship that he created, which was represented. I try to keep it as authentic as possible for the reader later to get a true essence of who this person was and why they may say the things the way they are, or why they think things the way they are, because how people perceive things in their history also views the whole aspect of history as well. So for my guiding thought is to keep authenticity and objectivity above all else. I guess any final notes that I would have would be hang in there. I know it's hard at first to get the hang of everything. There's a lot of information, it's overwhelming. But once you get the hang of it within the next few days or within the week, I would definitely say you'll be able to enjoy the process and the stories that you hear a lot more. And make sure to, you know, stretch your hands, scratch your fingers, and get a wireless keyboard and or mouse if you have a small laptop, because you don't want arthritis. So that would be my little side thoughts. But I hope that you enjoy what we have, and that the interviews and the processes that you're going to be going through interest you to look at our other collections, or even to spark an interest in you creating your own, or wanting to just learn oral history for yourself, and or conduct oral histories for topics that you find passionate about. Because in the end, if you're able to know the process of interviewing and documenting, all you need to do at that point is just add a little extra effort to create your own. So I would definitely recommend that.